I think we all need to start with the acknowledgement that DEI is not DEI. That is to say, there is a political ideology known as DEI, all capital letters. And then there are the three values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we can refer to these general values as little DEI, with lowercase letters. So we can speak of big DEI, the ideology, and little DEI, the actual values they stand for. Without some form of differentiation between the two, things obviously get confusing, and sometimes intentionally so. Do you support diversity, equity, and inclusion? You might as well ask, do you want to make America great again? Or are you in favor of social justice? Pretty much everyone is on board with little DEI. That is, we see value with bringing different kinds of people together, we prefer equity to inequity, and being an inclusive place is nice. Big DEI is a particular ideology or agenda that espouses one way to do that, or more precisely, a narrow range of approaches to enhancing those values in our society. Maybe you like DEI, maybe you like big DEI, maybe you think they've got the best approach. Okay. Maybe you don't like big DEI. Maybe you think their agenda undermines society's efforts to become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Okay, but big DEI and little DEI are not the same thing. You can't equate one ideology with the actual values, even if they share the same name. On a side note, wouldn't it be nice if we had representatives of these various groups hop up on a stage and have a polite dialogue or debate about whose ideas are better? That would be, interestingly enough, something that would enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I digress. The problem arises when there is only one group in the conversation about how to attain these values. And this is what we've seen throughout the country in recent years. Big DEI's advocates have taken for granted that they are the only ones with a good plan to improve society. When the big DEI folks are the only ones in the conversation about little DEI, it's not surprising that they associate their ideology, and only their ideology, with the pursuit of those values. That's a problem. But the bigger problem happens next. Advocates of big DEI can jump to the conclusion that critics of big DEI ideology are actually opponents of the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI's critics are dangerous. They just want a monoculture and inequity and exclusion. We are the virtuous ones, and we must oppose them. Of course, the critics of big DEI believe it's the big DEI ideology that creates a monoculture, inequity, and exclusion. And this all just encourages new tribalisms. One side who's virtuous and one side who's despicable. Now, aren't some of those anti-big DEI folks bad people who just don't care and want to maintain their unfair advantage in society? Absolutely. Just as much as there are big DEI supporters who are grifters out looking for a paycheck funded by white liberal guilt. But there are plenty of folks on both sides who really do want to improve society and see everyone treated fairly and justly. And that's what we're talking about here. People sometimes ask, is DEI really a different ideology? Is it really saying something controversial that reasonable people might oppose? Folks ask, what's wrong with the DEI agenda? What's wrong with handicap ramps, subtitles and captioning on TV, family restrooms, breastfeeding and pumping stations at work, pay equity, coming back to a job after childbirth, opposing workplace harassment, work accommodations for various disabilities, size-inclusive chairs and beds in medical facilities, various food options for vegetarians, vegans, kosher, gluten-free, etc. at medical facilities, large print materials, materials in different languages. What's wrong with those, huh? Well, if you go out and talk to just about anyone, nothing at all. Pretty much everyone is on board with all of that and a lot more. If that was what big DEI was, there would be no controversy. But that's not what big DEI folks are advancing. So, is there really an ideology of DEI? Is it more than just these reasonable and appropriate policies? Absolutely. How do you know? Well, just head over to Google after this video and type in DEI books. What you find is a collection of books that all share the same basic political ideology. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, Lily Zhang on just about every list of DEI books. These folks represent a particular orientation toward improving society. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't. But read through these books and you'll see that they are not simply advocating for obvious principles of fairness and justice. They're advancing some pretty radical ideas. And we can't get into all of it now, but here are some representative thoughts from these authors. Kendi. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. DiAngelo. A positive white identity is an impossible goal. White identity is inherently racist. White people do not exist outside the system of white supremacy. Coates. White America is a syndicate arrayed to protect its exclusive power to dominate and control our bodies. You may share this ideology. Okay, but you also know that other people who care about the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion think quite differently. And there are other folks out there, really smart folks, writing about these values, presenting their own ideas, often critical of the DEI industrial complex. Where are the books by John McWhorter, Coleman Hughes, Irshad Manji, Barry Weiss, Glenn Lowry, Nellie Bowles, Jason Riley, Shelby Steele, Thomas Sowell, and many more? They don't come up. Check what books are in your school's DEI library. Who are the speakers DEI staff invite? Whose ideas are discussed? It's almost always the ideologues of big DEI, and it's almost never those other folks I mentioned. Why not? Because when the powers that be discuss D, E, and I, they're talking about the ideology of big DEI, not those three particular values in general. If your DEI office is only advancing big DEI ideology, if it only hires people with that viewpoint, if it only invites speakers from that perspective, if it never provides an opportunity to hear its critics speak, you have to ask yourself, how committed is that office to the actual values of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Now, to be fair, I Googled around a bunch, and in one list of DEI books from the University of Michigan, it did include one chapter by Glenn Lowry. Okay, this is why people sometimes talk about this multi-billion-dollar conglomeration as the DEI industrial complex. It's huge, and it doesn't play well with others. And things have been set up linguistically so that if you critique DEI, you'll be accused of opposing the values of inclusion and equity and diversity. Now, I understand that's a handy tool to smack down your ideological opponents. You can play the old switcheroo between big DEI and little DEI to great effect, but it's not honest. It's also not honest to say, because I care about these values, I must support big DEI. Imagine an organization, say a collection of colleges, who declare, our institutional values demand that we work toward enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Therefore, we are obliged to embrace the DEI movement. It would be hard not to see in that more cleverness and sophistry than ethical commitment. We can see then that there are two significant problems that come out of this game. First, people get resentful and there's no dialogue. I'm one of the critics of big DEI. I honestly believe their political agendas and ideology make things worse, not better. If you're a supporter of big DEI and want to challenge me, that's fine. We might even have a really productive conversation. But if you tell everyone that I don't care about people because I oppose the noble values of diversity, justice, and inclusion, if you go and tweet that I'm a racist, well, I'm not going to like you. We're not going to have that nice conversation. And while I shouldn't, and I'll try not to, I might overreact. I might mischaracterize your views. And I might call you a woke lunatic. And I know that doesn't help. Second, when the big DEI people equate their ideology with little DEI, what happens when people start pushing back against big DEI? They're probably going to end up pushing back on the whole thing, including aspects of the values of diversity, equity, inclusion that both sides agree are good. I think we're seeing that now with the Trump executive order. In wanting to get rid of the ideological elements of big DEI present in the federal government, the language was hopelessly vague. I mean, what does it mean to oppose equity actions, initiatives, or programs? If you link big DEI with little DEI, as the former has done, efforts to get rid of big DEI ideology will probably lead to the elimination of positive elements that genuinely promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, things supported by both sides. So, what do? We all need to start being more precise with our words. We're stuck with the big DEI, little DEI confusion, but you and I can work on being more clear. If you're talking about the ideology, call it something like the DEI ideology. If you're talking about the values, make that clear as well. Better yet, drop the words that are so laden with baggage and try new words that are more accurate. Also, learn how to respond to unfair arguments. If you're accused of being deplorable, you can say, I'm not opposed to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm opposed to the dominant DEI ideology because I believe it actually undermines those values. When people talk about junking DEI entirely, you can ask, what are the specific ideas or actions that you're opposed to? Because we probably agree that certain DEI practices should be stopped, but certain other ones are actually quite helpful. Just don't buy into the fiction that DEI is DEI. Thank you.